Hi everyone, so this is a short presentation on conditional sentences. Conditional sentences can be used for many purposes. For example, cause and effect. So I played computer games all night, or if I play computer games all night, I will fail my history test. You can also talk about the future using conditionals, and you can speculate about past events as well. Okay, there's many functions to them. These are three of the most common. One of the main reasons to use conditionals in a paragraph is, to show off a little bit. They're quite difficult to use, and if you want to impress your reader with the complexity of your sentences, it can be a good idea to do this. And particularly in the academic English program, we like to see some complexity within sentences and that you can manage that successfully. So one of the main decisions that we have to make when we're dealing with conditionals is what we're talking about factual, like for example, traffic on the 405, or it's sunny in California. These are factual things, they happen all the time, but highly likely, or hypothetical. So for example, winning the lottery or becoming a billionaire. Or maybe flying cars. Okay, they don't really exist. But when we're talking about them, hypothetically, we might use a conditional. So we're making that decision. Is what we're talking about likely and factual, or is it hypothetical? Is it counterfactual? First of all, let's deal with factual conditionals. With any conditional sentence, we have the conditional clause and we have the result clause. The conditional clause very often starts with if, but not always. And if it's a factual conditional, you might use if plus the present. Okay, could be present progressive, could be present simple, could be present perfect. And the result clause might also be in the present. Okay, so this is what's called a zero conditional. It's used when the condition is in the present and the result is in the present. For example, when you press the button, the door opens. This is just a general truth that always happens. We might also have a result clause in the future. If this is the case, we use a modal plus the verb. For example, if you do your homework, again, if plus present for a factual conditional, you will pass the class. Okay, so we're using that future modal there, will, plus the verb. So these are for factual conditionals. These are very likely to happen. Let's have a quick practice here. So if hot this weekend, go to the beach. I'd just like you to write your conditional sentence in the box provided. So I have, if it is hot this weekend, again present tense, we will go to the beach. Future tense, the result clause is in the future. Okay, let's move on to hypothetical. So factual is very likely, hypothetical is either counterfactual, not true, or very unlikely. Again, we have a conditional clause and we have a result clause. For this, it's going to be future or present. So again, we have if. Again, they're not always if, but in this case, we have if. If it's hypothetical, we use the past. And then we have a modal plus base. In this case, we use a different modal. So if I lived in Japan, I don't live in Japan. I live in Southern California. Okay? But if I lived in Japan, past tense, I would eat sushi every day. So we don't use will, we use would. Slightly different. Now, if the hypothetical is about the past, we can't change the past, but we can talk about what would happen if we did. So, if this is the case, if your hypothetical conditional is in the past, we use if plus past perfect. and then modal plus have plus past participle. Let's see how that looks. So if I had lived in Japan 200 years ago, now clearly this is impossible. It's not going to happen, but we can still talk about it. So if I had lived in Japan 200 years ago, I could have been a ninja. This one's quite difficult. It's quite tough. Again, if plus past perfect, and then modal plus have plus past participle. That's how we speculate about what would happen in the past. Okay, let's move on. Let's practice a little. So this kid is not president, but if the kid president, give everyone free candy. Try to write a sentence, a correct sentence for that. Okay, so this is a hypothetical. He's not president. It's counterfactual. If he were president, again, past. And for this past, you'll notice we can use was or were. Okay, were is actually slightly more formal. He would give everyone free candy. Okay, again, counterfactual, so past and then would. Let's look at these. Let's look at some of the rules that we have. And I'd like you to try to complete these three sentences with the correct verb forms. As we can see, with the first one, we have would. We see would in the result clause there. So this one has to be in the past. Okay, if he had 10 years experience, the reality is he doesn't. He would get the job. But again, it's counterfactual. The next one, if you had started a day earlier, now this is the past perfect. Okay, if we have a past perfect there, it's probably going to be modal plus have plus past participle. You could have gone to the party last night. Okay, so hypothetical and in the past. For the last one, if I complete this presentation, we can see it's a present tense, so we're probably just going to use will. All right, just a quick heads up. So if you look at the first one, if he had, we don't have to use if. One thing we can do is we can take had, we can put that to the start of the sentence and take if off. Had he 10 years experience, this is exactly the same meaning and slightly more formal. Okay, so we don't have to always use if. In fact, there are a number of variations on if. Inverting is okay. So for example, were I or had I, instead of just saying if I were or if I had. And this is possible. Were I to win the lottery, I would buy a Ferrari. You can also use other words. For example, unless, which means if not, when, whether, or even if. Okay, these all have slightly different meanings, but they still function in the same way as a conditional sentence. So unless I find my keys, I can't leave the house. Again, unless means if not. So you can vary your sentences and try to mix them up. You don't always have to use if in a conditional. Okay, why not try them out in your papers, particularly in the analysis sections when you're analyzing a quote or some evidence. It's good to use them around then. And if you want, you can finish up by trying to answer this question. Okay, best of luck with your conditionals.